All right. So next up, we have Josh.
How you doing?
Good. Thanks for waiting. How are you?
I'm all right, man. I'm all right. It's getting a little warm, so
All right.
trying to soak in that sun. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna turn over the time now to you, Josh. We're gonna talk. Josh's gonna talk about camera movement, how that affects storytelling. So yeah, take it away. I will let you be the presenter now.
Thank you so much. Hey, everyone. Nice to meet everybody that's attending this webinar. Thank you, Andy Filmora, for having me here. Yeah, so camera movement, really important for those of you who are interested in pursuing filmmaking. Camera movement, there's just so much behind it. How you hold the camera, what you put your camera on, how you move in, how you move out, how you move side to side, pans, tilts, all these different movements can help accentuate, help tell your story, really help give your audience, your viewers, that mood, that emotion, because emotion is what makes filmmaking real. Emotion sells. Emotion is everything. This is what makes us human. So camera movement really helps produce an emotion. And we're going to cover some examples on how not only camera movement can affect emotion, but lens choices as well, because I think camera movement and the type of lens that you're using go hand in hand, and we're going to be talking about that. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We're going to jump into a PowerPoint. I'm going to show you exactly what I'm talking about. So before I do that, I kind of want to give you a rundown of what we're going to be talking about. So obviously camera movement, I'm going to go through that PowerPoint, but I also shot a music video about 2 weeks ago with a buddy of mine. His name is Joseph Bills. He's a hip hop artist from Arizona. And I used totally different types of camera movements. You know, I put my camera on a gimbal, which is an electronic stabilizer, which makes all your movements really stable and smooth. And I also did a lot of handheld camera movements. And there was a certain direction that I was going with or going for when deciding whether to go handheld or putting my camera on a gimbal. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Camera movement. So earlier on, I talked about handheld and using a gimbal. So a gimbal, if you don't know what a gimbal is, I strongly suggest that you check it out on Google just to get a vibe for what a gimbal is. It's very high tech. We're talking about brushless motors. We're talking about a microchip that can gauge how fast you're moving the whole rig, and it just stabilizes your camera so you don't see any of those jerky movements, especially if you're walking or running and you're just trying to follow an object. A gimbal eliminates a lot of that shake and a lot of that vibration, things that our bodies can't do. The gimbal does for us. So if you're handheld and you're running around, you're going to see a lot of that shake, a lot of that camera movement. But a gimbal, very little instability issues. So why would somebody use handheld over a gimbal? Or why would somebody use a gimbal over handheld? Again, this is all about storytelling. This is all about emotion. Directors think about this all the time. DPs think about this all the time. If you love watching movies, I would really suggest you to pay attention to how the camera is being used. Is it handheld? Is it on a tripod? Is it on a gimbal? So with handheld, if you watch a lot of hip hop music videos, a lot of shots are done handheld. That's because there's a lot of movement, a lot of dancing usually in hip hop videos. And when it's upbeat, you can see the camera moving around. You can see that it's really moving quick with the subject. On a gimbal, there's always some sort of lag happening because it's trying to stabilize your movements. But when you're handheld, you can instantly put your body's movements into the camera. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and go to some raw footage right here that I shot with my friend Joseph. And if we play this back, I'm going to actually scroll forward here a little bit. You can see him just like he's in his moment. He's in his scene right now. But this is all handheld. This is just a 2-minute take we did for one of his new songs that are coming out. So this is all handheld. I'm just following his movements with the camera. Just literally me holding the body of the camera and just moving around. But what's also interesting is the lens choice that I'm using. I'm using a wide angle lens. Why am I using a wide angle lens? Well, for one, it's the scenery. This is a really cool abandoned helicopter pad that I shot at, and it's very scenic. Beautiful blue skies with some clouds in there. The sun is peeking out through the clouds. We're really high up in the mountains here. So a wide angle lens does a great job of showcasing that landscape. On top of that, a wide angle lens will get rid of a lot of jerk and a lot of unwanted camera movements. So if I shot this type of handheld shot on a longer lens, let's say like a 50 millimeter or 75 millimeter, you wouldn't be able to get that same look. It would be more jerky. It wouldn't look good. So a gimbal, for example, let me go ahead and go to a gimbal shot here. So I have a really good shot of Joseph walking right here. So this right here was shot on a 35 millimeter lens. So it's approximately a little bit more than double the focal length. So it's going to be more tight on the subject. This is a medium shot. You don't see any jerky movements. I'm walking with him on gravel. Gravel is very uneven. It's difficult to walk on, but you see no camera shake. The camera is fixated directly on Joseph walking, but it looks like the camera is floating through the air as he's walking. So that's really cool. That's what a gimbal does when you compare it to handheld. And this is just another shot on a gimbal as well. Same lens, 35 millimeter. He's walking forward. I'm just tracking him from the back. And again, you see no camera shake. This is what a gimbal does, and this is what makes a gimbal very special. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you have to decide whether or not a certain shot needs a gimbal or if it needs to be handheld. This is something that you talk with the people that you're working with. This is something that you would probably most likely include in a shot list. You would talk to your director. But with this type of shot, this was mostly improvised. So my buddy Joseph, he hits me up. He's in Arizona. He's like, Josh, I'm coming to LA. Let's link up and let's shoot something. And I was like, all right, let's do it. So we took an hour or two to listen to a song. You know, we came up with some decent ideas. And I was like, all right, let me just grab my hands and grab my gimbal and we'll go to this cool helicopter pad. So that's exactly what happened. All right, so when should you use camera movement? I know this is kind of like a vague question, but a lot of people think that camera, especially when I was starting to shoot videos, I thought everything had to be as stable as possible. And by that, I mean, every shot has to be on a tripod, static, not moving. And the problem with this is that when a camera is static for too long, it gets too boring. Your audience just starts losing interest and there's really just not much going on. So that's why a lot of directors and a lot of DPs, if there is a long take happening on, let's say, a tripod, they either digitally start slowly zooming in on the subject, or they actually have the camera on some sort of dolly or a rig that can move forward while the camera is actually fixated on a tripod or something similar like that. So camera movement is happening all the time. So if you don't have camera movement, if it's a really static shot, it could be very boring. Now there's instances where you can have a camera on a tripod, but if the dialogue is so good, like in Godfather, for example, there's a lot of shots where the camera is static. The dialogue is so good and powerful that there is no need for there to be any camera movement at all in certain scenes. So you really have to dive deep into the actual context of what you're shooting. How is the script written? What is the dialogue like? And what are your actors doing? That is so important because the camera has to follow the actors. And if the actors for some reason don't have the energy or just don't have what it takes, if they're not a good actor, you as a DP, you as a director, you have to compensate for that somehow into the camera, into the lens, into the movement. So that's really important. You can have a bad actor, but make it shot really, really well, and you can still portray tons of emotion in your videos. So you definitely can use movement to dramatize a scene. You can make it more energetic, more fun, and this is what's going to drive your audience to watch more of your work. So I have some shots right here that I actually posted on my Instagram at momentum_productions. You can check it out right here. But you can see some simple shots here. This is something I was doing with a company called Hollyland. They make a ton of cool tech for filmmakers, a lot of video transmission systems. But anyway, if we scroll through here, you can see how I use a lot of camera movement. This shot right here is just on a tripod, nothing too special, but that's a gimbal right there. That's the Jewin Crane 2S, and I use that to create a lot of movement in my shots. This shot is handheld, as you can see right here. So I had a little script that I wrote for this, and I was just going off of that script, just going off of that vibe and that voiceover that I made for this video. So I intertwined a lot of handheld, a lot of gimbal, and even some drone shots, which I also consider a gimbal shot because that's basically what a drone is. It's, you know, an aircraft with a little gimbal on the bottom. So yeah, so there's all that types of cool stuff in there. Here's another shot with the gimbal, and my friend Kitty and I were in downtown LA at the time at night, and we were shooting this cool shot of her walking up these stairs that were lit up. And again, I was shooting this on a wide angle lens, and you can really see the wide landscape type view and how beautiful it looks. You don't see any camera shake in this shot because of that gimbal. So that's exactly what I wanted. If I tried to do this handheld, you would see a ton of shake, a ton of camera movement and that would ruin the shot. You don't want any of that. So there you go. And then here's another interesting thing here about lenses. So near me, there's a few tall buildings, and I used a 70-200 G Master Sony lens. And you can see right here that I'm looking up at this really tall building behind this tree. And as I zoom in to 200 millimeter, you can see what a gimbal does with this type of lens, something that our own hands can't do. It makes everything so stable. So when you're creating those dolly shots, when you're creating those slide movements with your camera on such long lenses, like look how tight I am on this AIG building. I don't know why it's reversed, but anyway, it's extremely tight on this building, but so stable, no jitters, no nothing. And you're gonna get some incredible shots. Like right now I'm prepping for the shot. I'm going to be behind this tree right here. And then as soon as I start walking, you're going to see how smooth it's like on a 200 millimeter lens on a gimbal. Just look at that peeking through. So this is what a gimbal can do for you. This is what it's all about. It's all about stability. So as a filmmaker, it's up to you. What is your story about? Does it need that POV or point of view look with handheld? Does it need that stability? So you have to be the judge of that. You really have to see what the point is of using your hands or your gimbal. And yeah, I mean, this is something that I'm really passionate about. It's something that I'm continuing to learn and work through. And I took 3 film courses in college, but I never pursued it in school. So this is just something I started picking up. I mean, before I used gimbals, I used manual stabilizers, which was basically all gravity based. I would put these weights on the bottom, and it was a whole process. But before gimbals were even created or even used widely like they are now, it was only handheld or those manual stabilizers, which were just a pain to use all the time. So now that we have this technology to create the smooth movements that everybody wants, and now that we have that, wide variety of videos that we can make, it's really up to you to help show emotion in your videos by using certain tools such as a gimbal or your own 2 hands. So that's my take on camera movement, the importance of what it can do for you. And I do think that even if you don't have a shot list, even if you just want to have some fun with a buddy, it's really good practice to decide whether or not you should be using a gimbal or a handheld. You have to go by the vibe, the energy, and the feel, because that's extremely important when you're trying to portray emotion. Now, some of the questions that you're probably going to be asking is, are gimbals expensive? Are they hard to find? Are they hard to use? The short answer is Yes, they are kind of expensive. They're getting cheaper every year, more affordable every year, just because the technology is improving and it's becoming easier to produce. Um, one of the cheaper gimbals for a DSLR, or for photography camera, or one of those Sony Alpha cameras, you can get maybe like 350, $400 for a decent gimbal. And if that's completely out of your budget and you still want to create those smooth shots, really consider playing around with frame rates. 120 frames per second will get you that nice, smooth, slow motion footage, and that will eat up a lot of those bumps that you would see even if you're handheld. So frame rate is also very important. But down the road, if you really want to shoot everything in real time, you do need a gimbal for that stability. Gimbals are just such a powerful tool, and they will last you forever. This is not something that you will have to buy a new gimbal every year. Once you have a gimbal, it's going to last you minimum 5 to 10 years, no problem. So once you have a gimbal, you're set. So I think 350, $400 for a gimbal for that long period of time, definitely a good buy. So another thing I wanted to talk about really quick are some cool transitions that you can incorporate. And I've made a ton of YouTube videos about this that really dive deep into transitions. But when I showed you that gimbal shot of me on that really long lens, that 200mm lens behind that tree, you could see that I was walking behind trees and trees were covering up the frame. That's a really good transition point. You can really merge two different shots or two different scenes by having that foreground blocking that whole entire shot. So you can use that as a transitional element. You can even use something as simple as a black jacket to use as a transitional element. I mean, there's just so many things that you can do. And if we had more time, I could actually show you the editing process behind it. But if you go on YouTube, if you do a little bit of research, you can definitely find out how transitions can help affect your story and how moving transitions can help affect your story. So not just simple crossfades or anything like that, but masking transitions and all that cool magic that you can really do in editing. So really consider using masking transitions and a lot of moving transitions in your shots. And I think that's going to help your storytelling so much more. Huh. So yeah, I hope that made sense.
Thank you. Wow. Yeah. Wow. It was really cool to get to actually see you in action. Some of those shots there. Really amazing to look at. I think that one of our questions from the audience is about the transitions, and you totally covered that in just now. So awesome. So what the next question is? What is the best or best cheap lens you would recommend?
It depends on the camera, but a really good cheap lens, like Canon makes this great 50mm lens. It's called a Nifty 50. $100. It's a tiny lens. It's 50mm, so it's pretty tight, but it's very shallow. So for those of you who want that shallow depth of field, those blurry backgrounds, that $100 lens that's 50mm is going to get you those beautiful shots. And you can definitely use that on a gimbal too. So a Nifty 50, definitely check it out. Sony makes 50mm lenses as well, but I think Canon makes the cheapest 50mm, and it's about $100 USD.
Cool. All right. I hope most of you guys understand that. I mean, I don't, but then I hope that was really helpful for you guys. Are there is there a gimbal that you can suggest for like a new video creator, someone just starting off?
Yeah, so check out Tech. I've been working with that company for a while. I used a lot of their gimbals. Check out the specific model called the Weeble S. Really good gimbal, very powerful, tiny, so it fits into a purse, a backpack, very easy to travel with, and it has a ton of cool features. And it works with most pro cameras, and by pro I mean like the Sony Alpha lineup, the Canon 5D Mark IIs, Mark IIIs, Mark IVs, those types of cameras, and the Nikons as well. So I would recommend the Weeble S for that.
Cool. let's see here. We've got a couple more questions. Is there anything maybe that you should maybe do, like with your camera, kind of to tell your story, like any kind of mistakes that you've, kind of had in the past and that you can give to our audience as tips?
Exactly. So camera settings are really important. So selecting the right frame rate, the right shutter speed, this has a lot to do with how the movement is captured, how your camera sees movement. If your frame rate is too fast, you're gonna get that what's it called? That soap opera look. You're not gonna get any motion blur. Your shutter speed has to be accurate. Usually the rule of thumb is to shoot double the shutter speed of your frame rate. So if you're shooting at 24 frames per second, which is what film is traditionally shot at, your shutter speed would be 1/50th or 1/48th. And then you just keep doubling up. If you shot at 30 frames per second, it'd be 1/60th. So you just keep following up that rule, and that rule is meant so you have consistent motion blur. And this is what's going to get you that really nice cinematic look in those frame rates. But your base frame rate, where you should always be shooting at, unless it's slow motion, should be 24 frames per second.
Cool. Awesome. Perfect. And so I think we're just a little bit short on time here. So if, you mentioned that you had a channel that talked a little bit about teaching, like kind of making those transitions with camera movements, and you have some tutorials. Can you give our audience a little bit of where it point direction to?
Sure. So if you go on YouTube, you just type in Momentum Productions, you'll find my YouTube channel there. On Instagram, I post a lot of, so my Instagram and YouTube are two separate entities. I post completely different tutorials on Instagram as well. A lot of BTS on Instagram or behind the scenes. And my Instagram handle is momentum_productions. So that's my Instagram.
Awesome. Great. Okay, so that's it for Josh's segment here. Thank you so much, Josh, for sharing your just amazing knowledge that I don't fully understand, but I think our audience can definitely relate to. Thank you so much, and feel free to stick around for Deanie's talk and and also Daniel's workshop.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Josh.